Hola, zoda dindi yangyara an number nenge soda nyamdo
Once again, I feel it is extremely fortunate for us to join together and have this opportunity to teach and listen to the Dharma. Likewise, I would also like to once again offer you my greetings, and at the same time, I would like to begin by continuing to speak what we began yesterday, and speaking about how Mikyo Dorje followed Karma Chinepa as his guru. So first of all, I think it'd be best to do this first. I think if I could, it'd be best to show you this first. So this is what it is. So if you can go from my left side, I'm not sure which side it is from you, but maybe it's from your right. I don't know. But in any case, the first is Sangye Nyempa. He's on the left, and then second Dulmo Tashi Weser, Chudip Senge, and Karma Chinepa. So these are the four main teachers. These four main teachers of Mikyo Dorje are these four. So this gives their birth year, the year they passed away, and their lifespan. And so I've written this up approximately here. And among them, Dulmo Tashi Weser probably passed away in 1545, and so I've written that there. And I was unable to get a good, clear picture of Karma Chinepa, but this picture is from a commentary on. This is from Karma Chinepa's own commentary on the Profound Inner Principles, and so I've taken that image from that edition and placed it here. However, still, what we still need to research here is what year Sanjay Nyempa was born. Now, this is probably should be something that's easy to figure out. The year he passed away was probably in 1525, and so this is something we need to research. Now, Dulmo Tashi Weser, we also need to research the year of his birth, and the others. Oh, I think we maybe have a mistake with Chudip Senge. He lived into his 80s, and so there's probably a bit mistaken there. The lifespan is mistaken there. So that is what it is. And so I thought I'd begin by showing this to all of you. Now, Karma Chinepa was the way Mikyo Dorje followed him as his guru is that Karma Chinepa what happened?
The
way Mikyo Dorje followed Karma Chinepa as his guru is that Mikyo Dorje sent 2 or 3 letters inviting Karma Chinepa to come to him, and then later he also sent a much more forceful letter saying he absolutely must come. And still, And at the same time, he asked for Karma Chenlepa's opinions about who would be the best Kempo to receive the to give Mikyo Dorje full ordination. And at that point, Karma Chenlepa responded by said that the Joden Kenshin Chudip Senge, who was said to be an emanation of the Arhat Angaja, would be the best. And he explained the reasons. And so Mikyo Dorje said that Chudip Senje had to be the Kempo and Karma Chenlepa should be the ritual master, ritual acharya, and they should both come to the encampment. When that letter came, they also sent people to escort them. And so Karma Chenlepa made his way towards Kompo. He met up with Chudip Senge on the way, and then from that point on, they traveled to the encampment together in Kompo. And then in the fire pig year of 1527, on the 4th day of the 11th month, they came to a retreat center at Namtur Mountain in Kompo. And in that retreat center, there was a place called the Upper Retreat of Sampel Wangpo. And that is where they first met Mikyo Dorje. Now, for several days, Kenshin Rinpoche was quite elderly, so they rested for a few days. And during this time, Mikyo Dorje gave Karma Chenlepa the transmission of the 6 yogas of Naropa. Then they decided on the 22nd day of that month, the astrological conjunctions were good. So Karma Chenlepa planned to start teaching Mikyo Dorje on that day. So that was the plan. But Mikyo Dorje said he couldn't wait until the 22nd. They had to start soon. I can't wait till the 22nd. I can't wait till the 22nd, he said. We have to do it soon. And when he said this, they began on the 17th. And Karma Chenlepa began teaching Mikyo Dorje. On that day, on the 17th, in the morning, Karma Chenlepa began to teach Mikyo Dorje the Prajnaparamita text. And then in the afternoon, in a gathering of the public, he was given an audience, and Karma Dorje made 100-fold offerings. And so at that time, Mikyo Dorje wore the black crown, and he gave teachings and made dedications and aspirations. Then from that time on, Karma Chenlepa would give as many teachings as could every morning, as it is said. And then on the 22nd, when Mikyo Dorje took the full ordination, Kempo Chudip Senje was the Kempo, and Karma Chenlepa was the ritual master, and there was a Gambu Kenshin Shakya Sengpo who was the private questioner. And Sampo Chuje Shakya Sampo had the same name, it seems. He was the timekeeper. And the Chuje of Gendungang Deshong and an appropriate number of the bhikshus from the 4 monasteries were present as Mikyo Dorje took the full ordination. So the next day after he had taken the full ordination, they continued the teachings on this. And during the teachings, in the mornings, Karma Chenlepa offered Mikyo Dorje the teachings on Prajnaparamita, and in the afternoon, the treasury of Abhidharma. Then after he's teaching those texts, he gave teachings on the Supralabhankunu, the differentiating middle from expenses, the differentiating the dharmas and dharmata, the compendium of validity by Dignaga, the commentary on validity, the treasury of valid logic, the Pratimoksha Sutra, the Vinaya Sutra, the compendium of Abhidharma, entering the middle way, and other texts. And so Mikyo Dorje memorized this, and he also took many notes on this. And there is also a text on the precepts of the Vinaya by Nyakpua. And so Karma Chunle taught from that and taught and explained the precepts of the Vinaya very clearly. And he also took the text on the rituals of motions, the karma, the sangha, the ways the sangha conducts its business, and the practice of the three foundational rituals. Then Mikyo Dorje told Karma Palemba that he need to, excuse me, and so then when we practice the three foundation rituals, from that time we've used the rituals on the three foundational rituals composed by Kamatunpa. Also, when people wish to take the lay vows, or wish to take the refuge vows of the lay practitioner, or the complete lay vows, or the 8 fasting vows, all of these we primarily give them from the text written by Karma Chunlepa. Then Mikyo Dorje told Karma Chunlepa that he needed to give him explanations of all 3 types of the vows. And so Karma Chunlepa said that Mikyo Dorje needed to receive all 3 types of the vows. And so from the Sangha Pandita's great bodhicitta, he gave Mikyo Dorje the vows of aspirational and Geta bodhicitta. He gave him the complete full empowerments and Tatra vows of the 9 deities of Vajra according to the 6th Karmapa Tongwudin and spiritual texts, and taught him the ritual practice of the diagrams of the mandala, mudras, and melodies. And so in this way, he gave the 3 he gave him the 3 types of vows. And also in the main teachings on the tantras come from in the Amrakaja as well as other Kaja lineages are primarily come from the Sublime Continuum. Since that is like a bridge in between the sutra and the tantra, we need to teach that. And we also emphasize the Hevajra Tantra in 2 books and the Profound Principles. And so that time, Karma Chunlepa gave him a detailed explanation of the Tantra in 2 books. And then in the actual practice, since he also gave explanations of the deities who we usually practice. He taught him about how to draw the diagrams for the diagrams for mandalas, and also gave at least examples of the mudras and the melodies and so forth. He also gave him the instructions on the Kala Chakra, gave him the astrology from Kala Chakra, as well as the 5 types of Sandhi, and all the profound Dharma pastime, and from the 7th Karmapa Jasa that Mikyo Dorje had not yet received. And he gave him the empowerments of long life and so forth. Now, but in detail, there is a lot that he taught if we said it in detail, but I don't need to mention everything. Now, how did Mikyo Dorje listen when he was being taught? So when they're teaching him, what he did was, first Karma Chunlepa would come to see Mikyo Dorje, and then as soon as he arrived, when Karma Chunlepa arrived, Mikyo Dorje would stand up from his seat. Since because he was a great teacher, sometimes he wouldn't get up. Like there's a protocol, if we say in English, that the question about who should stand up, who should sit down. There are the protocols about this. When I was in Tibet, I wouldn't get up for noon. It wasn't okay to get up for some and not get up for others. So even if I was a government official, I wouldn't come. If I was a lama, I wouldn't get up. Because if you get up for one and not for the other, then someone's going to come and say you have to come. It's difficult. So I'd sit down for everyone. Then when I got to India, then I would stand up for the audiences. The main reason why I stand up is that when foreigners came, they wouldn't know the Tibetan tradition of music placements, and you'd have to show. the attendants would kind of make them, kind of press them down down so they'd bend down. That didn't look good. And so they just don't know. And if you insist that they make them bend down, so at that time, so if I stood up, they could immediately say hello or good morning. It was very easy. And they could give them put the cut around their neck, and they would go away, and that was fine. It was easy, right? And so it really wasn't all that difficult. In any case, when Mikado Dorje, when Kamatrul Rinpoche would come to Mikado Dorje, Mikado Dorje would get up, prostrate him, prepare his set, and then he would say, "How were you last night?" and welcome him. And then after that welcome, without much other conversation, and they would immediately begin the teaching. And the teachings would go from morning until evening. And at lunchtime, even during that time, Mikado Dorje would be sort of inspired by his faith for Karma Trinnipa. It really affected him greatly. And he would say, I'm going to write he would write a praise for Karma Trinnipa and say, I'd like to offer you this praise. And he wrote 10 different praises or supplications or long life prayers in different poetic forms for Karma Trinnipa. And there's one of those that says that, it reads, a prayer for the long life of Karma Trinnipa, a scholar who is said to have reached the level of supreme worldly city on the supreme worldly dharma on the path of joining, whose fame fills the entire snow land. And so from this colophon, we can see that other people said that to Karma Trinnipa when they said that when Karma Trinnipa met Mikado Dorje, then they thought that Mikado Dorje must have thought he had some qualities of the path. So this is something that other people said later. But in any case, the beginning of the teaching, the first teaching they taught was the Prajnapada, the ornament of clear realization, using the translation by Bende Kao Petzik. And they had the teachings on that. Now they had 3 teaching sessions per day. It's like we'd say these days, we say classes, so 3 different, so then they had 3 different sessions. And he didn't have much difficulty learning the meaning and the words, so he said, we need to have more sessions per day. And please give me 6 or 7 sessions a day. And when he said to that, Karma Trinnipa was a little bit uncomfortable. He didn't quite believe. He said, if we have that many sessions in a day, then we'd only be able to say that I've taught it to you and you have heard it. You won't be able to retain any of the words or meaning. I don't know if that'll work out well at all. Then Mikado Dorje would said without any hesitation, these are the points that these are the difficult points of all the different things that he'd already been taught to that point. And at one point, from one perspective, he was pleased, another he was astonished. And if that is how it is, well then, if it is like that, then merely listening will be enough. And the teachings will also go quickly, and it'll get better and better. And so they increased the number of sessions per day to 6. For example, if we had to have 7 classes a day, it would be difficult, right? Now at that time, there also weren't any watches, and so because they didn't have watches, you'd have no idea how long a session lesson. That time you had to kind of keep track of the sun, and the sun doesn't go by minutes and minutes, and so it must have been really long periods. It's difficult for us to estimate even how long each session was. But in any case, they increased it to have 6 sessions a day. They went through the general discussions, the explication of the text, and the supplements, and so forth. And Mikyo Dorje was learned all easily without any difficulty. And Mikyo Dorje also taught the other dharmas of Maitrapa besides the ornament of clear realization according to his own commentaries. And some of them he taught on the explanation of the text, and some a commentary on the meaning. For others, he taught the difficult points of both the text and the meaning, and the general discussions and vibration and so forth. And Mikyo Dorje studied well, and he learned them very well early, and he became Mikyo Dorje became enough of a scholar and reached a level of learning that he was able to teach and debate and write about all of these topics. So if you think, well, we might wonder, how long did Mikyo Dorje study with Karma Trungpa? It was over the course of 3 years. We say over the course of 3 years. We say over the course of 3 years, but if you count in terms of the actual amount of time, it was only 14 months in total. And within that, so how long was there where the teachings continued without any interruptions? It was only one year. And so for a year, there was 1 year where they didn't miss a single day. In the old day, it wasn't like that. They didn't. In the old days, there was no talk about any days off or holidays, and so they spent. There was 1 year where they spent it every year. Now, during the time, as I mentioned before, during the teachings went from sunrise until evening. And so the teachings would last from sunrise to sunset. If there were people who needed audiences, and they'd have meetings, and they'd call them tea meetings. Now, these are like the meetings. So the Karmapa was the boss of the, as we say these, he was the boss of the great encampment. And so he'd have to go to these meetings. And in this, and during the meetings, they would give tea, they'd give out the tea in the rows, and so for that they'd offer give it in the meetings, and so they'd call them the tea rows. And so in Serpuma Monastery in old days as well, in the old monastery before the Cultural Revolution, you'd have to go up the main staircase, and then in front of there was a meeting room, what they called the tea room, and this is during the time of the Karma Gachin as well. In any case, he had a few audiences, go to the meetings for a short period, but other than that, he didn't do any other work at all. And he'd only engage in teaching and listening. Occasionally, when teaching, Karma Trungpa would occasionally say something not related to the current point, or he'd repeat something he'd already said yesterday, or he'd digress too far from one point. And when that happened, Mikyo Dorje would ask him, "Oh, this is the point that we got to, so please continue teaching from that point." And immediately ask him to do this. He said, "Don't make too many additions side by side, just make it exactly right." And so then Karma Trungpa would continue the place where he had left off before. So basically, they're not wasting any time. And then also during the teachings, and there are many different, sort of secondary questions, like what is the weather like today? Is people coming? He wouldn't speak about that at all. In order that he was able to listen, study, he had very little food. He drank less and less tea, because if you drink a lot of tea, you have to go to the bathroom. So he had less. If you eat a lot of food, when you eat a lot of food, then after that, you immediately start getting really lethargic, right? And so he ate less food. Also, while receiving the teachings, in order that he didn't fall asleep or that he didn't have to dispel any phlegm, he wore very thin clothes. Now, the region of Kongpo, compared to other regions of Tibet, was pretty warm. And since it's pretty warm, it's possible that you can get a bit lethargic, but Mikyo Dorje had such a great interest in the difficult points and the textual meaning of the works. He really wanted to see whether he could understand them. That his awareness always seemed really clear. It never seemed like he was bored. If there was some difficult point in the text that he didn't immediately know, it's not like he didn't pretend that he knew something when he didn't, or think, well, in the future he'd learn it. Instead, he would immediately ask a question of Karma Trungpa and try to resolve his doubt. So after basically teaching for just over a year, or 1 full year, at that time, Karma Trungpa had said he could only go, and after that time had passed, Karma Trungpa asked if he asked for permission to go. Now, there were still a few teachings that Mikyo Dorje that had not been finished. And also the teacher and student were just like unable to part from each other. And so Mikyo Dorje said that he'd go and continue and escort Dalai Lama Chapchen and come to him as far as Dakchi in Kongpo. And as they continued on the trip, Karma Trungpa gave him the rest of the teachings that remained to give him. Then on the third day, the first month of the ox year, 1529, J. Karma Trungpa made vast offerings to Mikyo Dorje to thank him and to pray for his new life. And he also offered a new long life prayer and a list of offerings, and had it read during that gathering of many different people. In other words, it was a very impressive event. But so basically, Karma Trungpa was supposed to go, but the student and the teacher were unable to part, and that they postponed it for another day. And then on the 11th day, when Karma Trungpa was departing, then the master and disciple prostrated to each other, and they touched their heads. And when they touched their heads and they made aspirations, what Mikyo Dorje said at that time was, "Please be my spiritual friend until I reach enlightenment," is what Mikyo Dorje said to Karma Trungpa. He made this prayer. And so this time he seemed unable to part from his authentic guru. And the way he praised him and respected him. And even the attendants in entourage were just amazed at the way he respected this, as it is related in the histories. So that's basically a brief history of how Mikyo Dorje studied with Karma Trungpa. When we think about the commentaries on the Prajnaparamita or the Middle Way or the Abhidharma, within those there are lots of prayers and supplications and praises of Karma Trungpa, right? So in his commentaries and explanations of the great text primarily came from Karma Trungpa. And so for that reason, us being able to read Mikyo Dorje's commentary on the great texts, and because our being able to study them comes from the connection that Mikyo Dorje had with his guru. And so we need to remember that. And we should take the way they acted as an example and study and learn from it. Now, as I mentioned before, Mikyo Dorje studied with these four main gurus, in Gyatso Tantro Rinpoche and these are four. And you might wonder did he study with any other gurus? So generally, what Mikyo Dorje thought was that no matter how many Buddhist scriptures you listen to or contemplate, there's no end to them. There's no end to listening or contemplation, and so for that reason, so later when Mikyo Dorje went from the region of Kham to central Tibet, if there was an authentic guru who, so whether they were a Sakya or a Gelugpa or Jigkung or a Chandrang or a Shalupa or a Nyingma, or whether the ancient tradition of Tantra or this new tradition of Samapa, he wished to study with them and treat them with respect. But it seems that he didn't really find any such spiritual friends. In particular, at that time, he really wished to get some explanations and clarifications on the Kala Chakra. And so he investigated and asked impartial people who within the Sakya, Gelug, and Kagyu lineages would be best to teach the Kala Chakra. So at that time, they said Cha Chamyon Tashi Namgyal and Panchen Dorje, who was a student of Panchen Shacha Chokden, were supposed to be the most knowledgeable about it. And so he put a lot of effort into inviting them. But even though he did, he first thought to himself, I thought maybe first we should have some distinction. And first have a little bit of discussion, give a little bit of discourse, and then see if he's able, see if Panchen Dorje was able to be a good guru, then. But Lama Dorje said that if you're definitely going to study with me, then I'm going to be with you. He said, now, if you're actually going to follow, no, I'll come if you're really going to study with me, but I'm not just going to pretend. It's as if he pretended he was not going to. And Mikyo Dorje, when he saw this, had a vision that the interdependent circumstances weren't right. And so for that reason, he was unable to invite Panchen Dorje. Later, when Mikyo Dorje went to Jigkung, first, there's the welcoming ceremony, and at that point, and they have the great arrange everyone sitting, but the person who is there's someone who is leading the person who was leading the discussions and so forth. The person who was doing that was Panchen Dorje. And so at that point, and Mikyo Dorje asked through Pao Tsula Trungwa, he asked many different questions. The questions that he asked were, the first question was, it says that in Sakya Pandija's text on the three vows, it says in the 18 different schools, there are 18 different Vinays. Then if that is so, then there must be 18 different philosophical schools. So what are the differences between these 15 different philosophical schools? And when he asked that, then the Panchen Dorje said in a very loud voice, and he spoke with a melody and like a real showing off. There are many different schools among the exposition schools and sutra schools that we know from the Abhidharma Middle Way and from the texts on validity. Then Mikyo Dorje asked, what are the differences between the 18 schools? Not just the sutra and exposition school, but what are the differences between the 18 schools? And then Panchen gave a very long answer, but there's no main point to it. And so then once again, Mikyo Dorje asked him, so you're saying you have nothing to say about the 18 schools when he asked that. At that point, Panchen got his voice started quivering, and he spoke a little bit more softly. So actually, I don't have anything to say. I really don't have anything to say, he accepted. Then Mikitoji said, well, the exposition school accepts that there is a self, does not accept self-awareness. The Sutra school does. The mind only asserts that self-awareness exists ultimately. And the ultimate middle way refutes self-awareness. And in the Tantras, it said that one awakens because of self-awareness. So what is the differences between these different schools' positions on self, or their descriptions of self-awareness? And so when you ask that, then Dorje will go to speak in software and started quivering and move forward. In similar time. It's like he said various discombobulated things about like things like the apprehended images and apprehending images explained in the text on validity. And at the end, Megdra says, "Are you just saying you don't know?" And at that point, very, very softly, Panchen said, "Oh, I don't know." And so he accepted that he didn't know. And then the ceremony ended, and Panchen Dorje said to Pao Tsula Trengwa, Mikyu Dorje was not speaking directly to him. He was speaking through Pao Tsula Trengwa. So Panchen Dorje so right after the ceremony, Panchen Dorje spoke to Pao Tsula Trengwa. He said, generally, it's said that I know the texts, but it's said that I'm familiar with them. And in particular, when I learned that the Karmapa was coming, and from that time on, I spent all day and night studying. I read a lot of texts. And I reminded myself, or I reviewed what I'd forgotten. And I looked at all of these decisions he might have asked about. And there's a lot of thoughts, and I looked them all up. But I haven't looked at that, but the things he asked about today, they didn't ask anything about the things that I'd looked at, that I'd reviewed the other day. He didn't answer. So how is it? He must be clairvoyant, he said. And so he had this kind of conversation with Pao Tsula Trengwa, as Pao Tsula Trengwa himself said. Then after that, then Mikyu Dorje so Panchen Dorje asked questions of Mikyu Dorje. He had many scrolls that he submitted to Mikyu Dorje, and he had questions about whether it is possible for vows to arise without a kempo and so forth. So he had one question about the Vinaya. He had one page each for the Prajnaparamita, validity, Abhidharma, middle way, and Tantra in general. And in particular, the Kalachakra. And so he had these 7 pieces of papers, right? And he said that all of these their ultimate view is the Shentong view, so the middle way and the Abhidharma, the validity, all of these are the Shentong view. And so he offered these papers to Mikyu Dorje. Then Mikyu Dorje gave an answer. Your questions about the Vinaya that are really not actually other difficult points. So there is a commentary on the Vinaya that I wrote. So if you read that, you'll probably know. No, you're saying that the validity and middle way are all the Shentong views, but that's illogical. You can't say that. And so that is the answer Mikyu Dorje gave. And when he gave that answer, then Panchen Dorje tried to respond with proofs to saying that the ultimate meaning of the validity and middle way is the Shentong. And Pao Tsula says that one has a particularly astonishing afternoon. Then when Mikyu Dorje said, he didn't say what he wrote as instead of answering, if you just keep on doing that, You're going to say people are going to lose faith in the Karmapa. This is like it's really kind of he didn't really actually give real answers to the question. Instead, he just wrote things such as this. But it's anyways that but Mika Dorje did offer Panchen Dorje the respect and position that he should have as a good scholar. Then there's another scholar that he wished to receive the Kala Chakra from, and that was Jamyang Tashi Namja. Cha Jamyang Tashi Namja, when he was invited, he didn't go. He was unable to go, but he had, at that time, he had really 200 rare and well-edited texts that, so 200 volumes that he offered to Mika Dorje. And he said that whatever qualities I have come, that I know about, come from reading these. So I'm not able to come now, but please read these texts, he said. And when he said this, then, so at that time, Mika Dorje really wished to study with many other different lamas, but that did not happen. And so for that reason, Mika Dorje, what he said himself was, Karma Chinapa is elderly, and I haven't found anyone else who is worthy of studying with. But still, if I can find a master who is worthy of studying with, then I'll complete to a high level my listening, contemplation, meditation of the ocean of tantras. And so this is what Mika Dorje said. So when we look at this, I sometimes think, when I was young, I thought I should study, but when I was in Tibet, when we would make requests to the government, and so that the heart sons of the 16th Karmapa, the Gyaltsab Rinpoche and Taisutri Rinpoche and Gyaltsab Rinpoche are in India, and so please bring them to Tibet, or either that will need to go to India. So I made this request many times, and then when I arrived in India, I did study some texts, and I tried, and I put some effort into it, both the two Rinpoches, and also Kebje Vajradhara, Trang Rinpoche, and Bokar Vajradhara. And who else? Who is it? Tengar Rinpoche, Kebje Tengar Rinpoche, Kebje Sangye Nampa Rinpoche. I've received many teachings from them, but I thought that I should study text the way they do in the great Golok monastic colleges, or the way they do in Shedra, but I wasn't able to do that, and I have studied quite a bit, but I was a little disappointed that I wasn't able to study everything. Then in the meantime, I did think that maybe at one point I thought maybe I should go to one of the great monastic colleges of Sera, Drepung, and study, but at that point, I was not just an ordinary Kagyu Lama, and since I had the title of Karmapa, and if I were to go to Sera and Ganden or Drepung, then I was worried about what the Kagyu followers of the Kagyu would think about that. But when Geshes would come to Juta Monastery, I had many discussions with them. In any case, so similarly, I had the wish to study the texts, but but it's hard for me to find an opportunity to study the way you do in a Shudder, to find people to teach the way you do in Shudder. Mikio Dorje also had the same situation. He found so many, searched for so many lamas, but he's still not satisfied, and he's still looking for more text to study. And he had such a great interest in and longing to study. So basically, Mikio Dorje had such a great interest in texts, and other people used that great who also did use the audience and so forth as an opportunity to offer many rare texts. And so they just automatically, he received innumerable texts of commentaries on the sutras and tantras. And he would spend all night reading and memorizing them without any description and making notes. And what he did is when he was reading them, he was very detailed. He would mark all the outlines in red. He'd mark the root text and the citations in yellow. If there was some subtle point about the text that wasn't clear about him, that he didn't understand, he'd write down, then he'd make little notes that I don't understand this. I need to look it up in other texts. So he'd write this out in small text. And the things that were extremely difficult, if he couldn't find them in one, if they weren't clear in any one commentary, he'd look at the different commentary, made different annotations about the different interpretations in the different commentaries, and use that as a way to make notes about how he's resolving his doubts. And he would also ask everyone who was said to know that text about the meaning of the text. And if there was some real point that he took him, he would take a note of it. And then he'd keep the notes. And then later, he would do what he could to resolve his doubts and misunderstandings. For example, when he's receiving the Treasure of Valid Logic and its commentary, or commentaries like the Higher and Lower Abhidhamma, he would memorize them. And the way he memorized them was from the first evening session until the birds began signing in the morning, he would recite the text. He did this for many times. And so he would basically be memorizing from 10 in the morning till 3 in the morning, all night long, memorizing. And not just one day or not just a month, he did this for several years. And so he continued this studying in this way for many years. Not only was it the text on the great philosophicals, but at that time, there was also a bilingual master, Kama Lodsawa Rinchen Tashi. So he was a translator. He knew Sanskrit. And so Mikio Dorje studied from him the grammars by Kalapa and Chandragami. These are Sanskrit grammars, like what we call so he studied the grammars by Kalapa and Chandragami. He also studied about metaphors and composition, the Sanskrit writing system, and the Tibetan grammar as well. And then from Kongtun Shatyo Rinchen and Sangtun Doje Sangpo, Ngaripa Lecture Dorje, he studied the Indian and Tibetan texts on validity from them. And in terms of Samiti, the text on validity, and he studied many texts, including texts on collected atomics and so forth. And from Pautsulo Trengwa, who was actually his student, but from Pautsulo Trengwa, he studied the Compendium of Australia by Rangchen Dorje and the compositions that please the learned. So this is another astrology text. And so at that time, he learned how to do the calculations and so forth. So basically, no need to mention all the people who know the great texts, even the people who know the minor fields of knowledge. He really treated them. He treated them as great. He thought of them as being more rare than gold, and he would think of them as like eyes to produce the produce progeny. He'd think of it. So he thought of them as eyes, so you could see them. He thought them as light that dispels the ignorance about the nature, and as like having the great result of accomplishing great enlightenment. And so when there are people who had education, who had qualities, he respected them all. He respected them all, and he treated them all with respect. And everyone saw how he did this and experienced it. Similarly, Paotsula Chengwa said in his History of Feast of Scholars, sometimes there are some scholars who are said to be unrivaled, and when that would happen, then it said he would he would outshine them to a degree that they would be unable to answer his questions. And so they'd say, and some people gave only partial answers, but they would later feel regret about it. But at that time, Gyawan Kambapa himself, he was such a great person. Even if he was a great scholar, and when you come to a great being, sometimes people get a little bit nervous about that. So I think maybe it was that. That's because Mikyo Dorje was actually so intelligent. He had studied quite a lot, but I think he also had an innate intelligence. And so for that reason, many scholars would come to him, he would just naturally outshine all these other scholars. But Mikyo Dorje himself would always say, so I have little intelligence, and I have little education. I really don't know anything, he'd say. And when he said this, I don't think that he was just being modest. He thought this from the bottom of his heart. It's not, sometimes people, it's not like he was just saying that he was being modest, but the inside there, people have the pride of thinking they know it. But it wasn't like that. He thought this from the bottom of the heart. I don't know. I have little intelligence and education. And so this is what Paotsula Chengwa said. In any case, so now, because of time, I think that's enough about how I have studied, Mikyo Dorje studied with other authentic spiritual friends. So in summary, what I'd like to say is that Mikyo Dorje had great love for deluded beings and great reverence for the precious teachings. And in this way, Mikyo Dorje accepted great hardwits and took on the great problems, difficulties to study with his spiritual friends. And then whatever experience arose from his teaching and listening and meditation, he didn't hide any of it. He, without being miserly about the Dharma, he would teach the Dharma appropriate to the ability of those who sought it without delay. I think this is one of the most important of Mikyo Dorje's goods. So I think we need to use his deeds and his life as an example, and we need to follow it. As I mentioned the other day, when we receive the supplications, we say we shouldn't just be saying, "Oh, I go for refuge. Please look at me with compassion." Nor should they just saying, "Oh, this is an important, great Lama," or just praise him. That's not enough either. It's like it should be like just as it is said, whatever the Guru's Lama did, so will I do the same thing. We need to use the practice of the previous Gurus as our example. So we need to take an example from Mikyo Dorje. And in order that we ourselves will be able to benefit sentient beings and to serve the teachings, we need to get experience in listening through the Buddhist scriptures through listening and contemplating. And then after that, we shouldn't think about it as being, I'm great, I'm educated, not try to make ourselves big. Instead, we should think about all those people, those sentient beings who are suffering, stricken by suffering, and see what we can do to help them. we need to see what we can do to do good deeds on behalf of the teaching to serve them. We have made many different shedras, and that's the reason why we've done it. It's not so that you in the future will get some sort of a degree as an acharya or a kempo and to get a lot of diplomas. But in the actuality, if you end up without any wish to benefit sentient beings or serve the Buddha's teachings, then there's no point or no meaning to studying in a shedra. And so this is really important for us to keep this in mind. So now we'll take a break now. And then when we come back, I will continue. So today, I will teach you a new statue from the good deeds. So we've had several days of teaching, but haven't been able to go through many teachings of the good deeds. So there's no choice but to start one today. So I'm going to say, yes, I'm really going to do one today. Now the autobiographical versus good deeds. I'll speak about the fourth of the good deeds. And the text of and the actual text of this has the main part of the text has too many parts. And so the first of these is the preliminaries, how to eat, enter the Dharma. And this has 6 points. And so this is the fourth of those 6 points. What the fourth is abandoning meaningless distractions. And the root text reads, when I developed certainty from the bottom of my heart that ordinary distractions are merely ways to waste this life, I cast away all commonplace diversions. My awareness became clear. I found conviction in the jewels. I think of this as one of my good deeds.
I
don't need to go through the words right through each and every word. So in general, within Mikyo Dorje's collected works, there is an instruction and training on the liberation stories of Mikyo Dorje. And so there's instructions on training and liberation stories. I thought I'd give a citation or a quotation from that text. Now, what he said there is, one must follow the Guru without ever being separate from them. How long must one follow the Guru? Until you achieve in Buddha, you must follow to the Guru. But in order to follow the Guru in that way, you must have the fortune to be in a time and place similar to the Guru's, the spiritual friends, and a body and mind of the same kind. Once you have achieved that superior basis, you must be free of obstacles and have the favorable conditions that permit following the Guru and the Dharma. That depends upon gathering virtuous karma for that sake, such as having faith in the Guru and the true Dharma, and on diligence, mindfulness, samadhi, and prajna. Therefore, you must eliminate the impediments to virtue, the conditions that create afflictions, the places and friends that are especially pleasant and unpleasant, that are especially pleasant or unpleasant, the cognitions that want, crave for, or hate those, If you can eliminate ordinary distractions for such purposes and direct distractions of thinking about the methods for greatness in this life and this life, and then find solidity of body, speech, and mind, your mind will become workable and your awareness will come clear. Prajna will ripen and you will remember the qualities of the three jewels. When you remember that, you will feel that if you use your body and speech and mind for pointless acts for even an instant, it is even more precious than your life. Practice that one-pointedly with that feeling. So when we want to follow the gurus, we should never separate them from them until we achieve, or we need to follow them without being separate until we achieve Buddhahood. If we just follow them for a few days or a few months or a few years, that is enough. So you need to follow the spiritual friend until you achieve Buddhahood. And in order to follow that guru, what you need is merit. You need to have the same the merit of the same fortune to be able to follow the spiritual friend, to receive Dharma teachings from the spiritual friend, or to practice. We need to have the special basis of a body and mind. And so what that is in order for that, we must gather the accumulations, right? The main reason why we say that the precious human body with its leisures and resources is so precious, because on that basis, we have all the things that we need, all the favorable conditions we need to practice the Dharma. And so that is why the human body with the leisures and resources is so important. Otherwise, just merely having human body is not necessarily an actual precious human body with leisure and resources. So, whether we have a human body with the leisures and resources or not depends upon whether we're able to find the teachings from an authentic spiritual friend and whether we are able to practice them. And while we are practicing virtue through listening, contemplating, and meditating, then the impediments, or what obstructs that, there are many adverse circumstances to that, many of them. But among all the different but the worst of all these innumerable adversities is the afflictions within our own being. It's our thoughts of greed and hatred. So if we need to overcome obstacles, then we don't need to think about doing repulsing obstructors or giving torments to something outside. We need to see if we are able to eliminate all of the afflicted thoughts within our minds. And we have within ourselves, we have the imprints that lead to the thoughts of attachment and aversion. And because we have them within, in that we also have all the distractions of this life, the thoughts of we have many plans to become great in this life. We have a lot of things, and all of these are fooling us. And so all of these worldly distractions, we must see how much can we distance ourselves from those worldly distractions. With our body, we can see, can we stay in a solitary place? And with our speech, we shouldn't say lots of meaningless things instead, but remain silent. But we also need to see, instead of our mind getting distracted, can our minds rest peacefully? And if we do that, then eventually our mind can be used in a virtuous way and will go in the virtuous direction. Our awareness, or our mind, will become clear. Our intelligence will increase. Our faith in the three jewels will grow stronger. And so for these reasons,
야나지 가르소에 지대 체계기 체도 배제 땅바이미나
if we use our body, speech, and mind for pointless things or for the eight worldly concerns, then that is just a total loss. And so for that, we need to see if we can use our body, speech, and mind to give our human life meaning and to practice the true Dharma. And so Mikyo Dorje himself, in his own life, as I have explained before, was never fooled by the things of these days. And what is the example of how he did this? During the time of Mikyo Dorje, there was the king of Zhang. And so at that time, he ruled over many, had power over many regions of Kham. And so the king of Zhang was at that time very powerful. And so he invited Mikyo Dorje. And he followed him as his root guru, as his primary guru. And likewise, the Ming Emperor Zhengde, also called Qingguo, but the Ming Emperor Zhengde, in particular, sent messengers and an incredible and an unconceivable amount of offerings, and a letter inviting him to Mikyo Dorje to come to China. And at that time, many great people, great gurus, regarded Mikyo Dorje very high and respected him greatly. Likewise, the Karmapa's Great Encampment, which is named the Ornament of the World, was probably the most influential organization in Tibet at that time. And Karma Kagyu Lamas, monasteries and so forth, filled all areas of Tibet. And so they were very powerful, both in terms of Dharma and in terms of politics. And the Karmapa was considered by the Tibetans foremost, but also by many other lamas, was considered as a great lama who they could all have faith in. And this is a good situation, or a fine situation, you could say, but Mikyo Dorje himself did not like being great and impressive or using his power or trying to increase the influence of his sect or to increase the influence and prosperity of the monasteries underneath him. He didn't like that at all. Not only that, he did whatever he could to prevent any of that from occurring. And so if we want to point to it, if I just say this like that, if it doesn't help to just say that's how it was, I have to describe it in detail. So I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss the relations between the country of Zhang and the Karmapa, and likewise, and the relation between the Ming Emperor primarily, as well as the other Chinese people with the Karmapa. So I thought I'd speak about that. So today I will first speak about the relations with Zhang. I will speak about the relations with the Ming Emperor and so forth in general. Okay. So what is this country of Zhang? Maybe you've heard of it, but probably most of you haven't heard of it because you all are staying in India and Nepal and Bhutan. So you probably don't know much about what Zhang. If you've come from Tibet, you probably know a bit about it. But Zhang is during the time of the Tibetan emperors. And the old histories from that period mention the name Zhang. They spelled it, it's sometimes called Aozhang. They spelled it with different spellings. And so this history does come from the time of the Tibet. There are histories about it from the time of the Tibetan kings. So during that period, Zhang came under Tibetan control several times. In particular, the Tibetan Emperor Dusung Rinpoche, who was one of the kings or emperors of Tibet. If we looked at it, now there are different accounts of his birth year. According to the manuscripts in Dunhuang, so it's the caves in one area, and within that, there are many. They found many old Tibetan documents. And one of them, the Dusung Mangpo, was born in 676. The documents from the Tang Gyalpa give another date for him, but I don't need to go into too much detail about that. But anyways, Dusung Mangpo was one of the Tibetan emperors. He went to Zhang. He invaded Zhang and took power over Zhang. And so the place where he passed away was actually in Zhang. So that is the history about it. So there's from earlier times there was a connection between Zhang and Tibet. So when did the Zhang company, sort of you could call it a kingdom or a minor kingdom? It wasn't a big kingdom. So when it arose, it was somewhere around in the 7th or 8th centuries. It arose in the border regions between Tibet and China. So they had different dynasties, and when they exchanged the dynasties in Tibet, so with the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan, so during the time of Kublai Khan, the Mongol Emperor, Yuan Emperor, he went to the place of Dali, which is in current Yuan. It's another kingdom. It's larger than Zhang. So at that point, that area surrendered to the Mongols, and a government was installed over Yunnan and Jiang. And so he gained the ability to give the governor over the Yunnan and the Jiang provinces. Then after the Yuan was the Ming dynasty. And so in 1381, during the Ming dynasty, the Ming armies invaded Yunnan. Once again, the Jiang surrendered to the Chinese, to the Ming emperors. And then the Ming emperor is that state or province. The Ming province was able to appoint a governor over that area. Later, so now the kings of Zhang were from where their clan was called Mu, and so Mu is actually the Chinese word for word. And so that name was given to them by the emperor. So before that, they were called the Wus. So before that, they weren't called by them. They had no clan name before then. Now, how did they make a connection with the Karmapa during the time of the 7th Karmapa, Chuta Gyatso? They first made a connection with the king of Zhang. So the king of Zhang made offerings to 7th Karmapa Chuta Gyatso and invited him to Zhang, but he was not able to actually go to Zhang. The 8th Karmapa Mikya Dorjide was also invited to Zhang, and the king who invited him was the 13th king of Zhang. His name, if I show this to you, if I show you a picture of the king of Zhang. He's the 13th king of Zhang. His name in Chinese is Mu Ding. It's called Mu Dang or Mu Ding. But his actual nationality was from the Nya family. So in the embassy, they talked about the Naki. They called the white Naki and the black Naki. Nyaka, white Nyaki and the black Nyaki. This is probably the white Nyaki is what we call the Baizu. The black one is what we call the Ngachi. But the white Nyak, in their own language, they called this king Aya Achu. But that's really strange. It's Aya Achu, right? But in their language, they called him, their local language, they called him Aya Achu. He was born, and the date of passing I've written down here. I don't need to read them. So he was enthroned on 1502. In 1502 or 1503, and so in that time period, he ascended to the throne. And at that time, he took care of these called Gyatang and Kam, but these times they're called Sharila. Shangali in Chinese. They call it Shangali in Chinese. But I think in English it probably is Shangri. So he took power over he had power over many regions of Kam as well. And so he's the one who invited Mikhe Dorje. So what is the way that Mikhe Dorje was invited? So Mikhe Dorje was enthroned as a Karmapa at the age of 7. So not long after he was enthroned, there was a Lama from Zhang called Lama Tashi, and he offered him a letter from the king of Zhang. So this was the first connection between Mikhe Dorje and the king of Zhang in this life. And then Mikhe Dorje was traveling through the areas of Kam. He visited Karma Monastery and Kampo Nenang and the seats of Dusim Khenpa. And at that time, the king of Zhang invited him, saying, "Please come to Zhang." And so someone came offering this aspiration, and when that person came, Mikhe Dorje agreed to go. And he eventually he came to the place called Gyatang, which, as I said before, which is in the present day province of Shangri in the province of Yunnan. And then on 1516, on the third day of the Vesak month, he went to Zhang. And when he arrived in Zhang, then it's happened, there was an elephant within the ranks of the escort come to welcome them. He had been tied down, but the king broke the rope, came to the encampment to the Karmapa's pet, and without anyone telling he came to the Karmapa and automatically or immediately bowed his head. And then the elephants do something to show respect. They hold their trunk up like this, right? So he did that. And when he did that, everyone is surprised. And so everyone is amazed at this. And so when Mikhe Dorje came arrived in Zhang, 10,000 soldiers came to welcome and escort them. And so they came to the palace of the king of Zhang in a place called Satam. And they set up camp there near the Satam palace. So there's quite a bit more to say about the Zhang, the king of Zhang. So there's more to say about him. I'd like to show you. the palace of the king of Zhang is, even to this day, it's still really beautiful and really well decorated. There's the Forbidden City, the palace of the Forbidden City in Beijing, and so this is like a small version of that. So in any case, this is the royal palace in Zhang, which is still with us. So Mikhail Dorje was staying in the encampment near the palace, not in the palace itself, but in the encampment. So as he was staying in the encampment, the next day at dawn, the king of Zhang himself came to see the Karmapa. And the king of Zhang himself came in a litter. That's what we call a jumte. So it's a litter that's carried by 3 or 4 people. So he came on such a litter. And the king's uncle and his younger brothers each rode their own elephant. And near them, there was also one more elephant who's led separately. And there are horses of different colors, red and white, and also with riders on them. They were holding banners and conchs and symbols, and most of them, they had a great procession to welcome him. And they came to the gate, or to the door of Mikhail Dorje's tent. And so the king dismounted at that place. And I think he was probably staying at the door of Mikhail Dorje's tent, and he prostrated right there. Now at that time, in their language, Mikhail Dorje didn't know their language. So there is a person called La Katsanyan, he was the translator. And they exchanged welcomes and tashidilek, and they also made some offerings to each other. And at that time, there was an elephant. There was another elephant that once again prostrated. And not only did it prostrate, it also trumpeted really loudly. I don't know how to make an elephant's voice, so I'm not going to try. If I try to imitate an elephant cat, if I go, I don't know what they say. They probably go like that, don't they? But they do have they do trumpet, right? And at that point, some person said, "Why is the elephant making such a racket?" So why is it? When asking why is the elephant trumpeting like that, the herdsman said, he's really happy that the Buddha has come to see him, and that's why he's trumpeting, because he's trumpeting because he's so happy. So at that point, there are many rainbows in the sky and rains of flowers and so forth, and many other auspicious signs. Then from that time, he spent a week in Zhang, and every day, in the evening, outside of the tent, or the equivalent, the king would prepare. And they made many offerings of music, and they're still there. And in Zhang, there are people who play there are old people who are in their 70s and 80s who play they play the traditional music, and they have this, and they say it's a really old form of music. And so this is considered as one of the by the World Heritage Organization, considers this one of the cultural treasures of the world. So that's probably the type of music that they played around the edges of the encampment. And then at that time, the king, Mikhail Dorje gave the king statues of the Buddha in the 7th Karmapa, the Avatamsaka Sutra in Chinese, relics of the Buddhas, and also horses that he had brought with him from Tibet. And so he made these gifts to the king. And then the Karmapa was escorted by the attendant. So the Karmapa, as I mentioned before, was in a litter, and he was brought into the palace. And the king himself, so the 3 different gates, there are 3 gates. So the king came down to the middle gate and offered him a khatam. So at that time, there also, among the welcome party, there were many Chinese monks with with musical instruments, and there was also a huge drum that needed 16 people to play it. And so they said that they actually that they played that drum, as it's described in the histories. And Mikhail Dorje went into the palace, and said that Mikhail Dorje was put on a golden throne in the palace, and all the other people were placed on thrones. Or in the Chinese tradition, they had wooden chairs, like that's in the Chinese style, and then the tea was served, and at the same time, the king made offerings of 100 offerings of silks and so forth. And now the king had 3 queens, and the 3 queens gave their own jewelry. They took off their jewelry and offered it to the Karmapa, and they took the Bodhisattva vows. So after that event was over, then the king escorted the Karmapa back to the Tibet, back to the encampment, sorry. And then the next day, he was once again in the same way invited to the palace. And at that point, what the king said, at that point, Zhang was waging war against many areas in Tibet and taking control of them. And so the lamas and ministers had made the request to Mikhail Dorje. And for this reason, when speaking with Mikhail Dorje, then the king of Zhang agreed not to wage war against Tibet for 13 years. And for 10 years, he would send 500 people to become monks in central Tibet. So this is another promise he made. And he also promised to build 100 areas in their region. And so also at that time, according to the hope of the king of Zhang at that point was that the Gyalwang Karmapa would stay in Zhang permanently. And please be my guru, or be my object of reverence. But Mikhail Dorje did not agree and went back to Tibet. He did not agree to spend a long time in Zhang. And so at that time, Mikhail Dorje spent 1 week in Satam. So generally, the Zhang kings had not previously had faith in Buddhism, because they had their own faith. They had their own, similar to the Buddha tradition, their own traditions that were similar to previous Buddha, and they would make offerings and sacrifice animals to the deities. But from that time on, the king gained unshakable faith in Buddhism, in particular in the Karma Kagyu teachings. And he became a very significant sponsor of the Karma Kagyu teachings. And the 10th Karmapa, Chögyam Dorje, when there was a great war in central Tibet, and Chögyam Dorje was unable to stay in central Tibet, Chögyam Dorje went through Kham and eventually came to Zhang and spent a long time in the kingdom of Zhang. If there hadn't been a place such as Zhang to Chögyam Dorje to go to, then at that time, then probably you can wonder whether the Karmapa would have survived a situation with so much conflict and war. And so for at that time, the king of Zhang and the people of Zhang, in terms of the Karma Kagyu history, are extremely kind to us. They're like our refuge that we could go to during the time of difficulties, and a place that we could put them. So that was Zhang at that time. And so it's a very great kindness for the Karma Kagyu. So Mikhail Dorje spent a week in Zhang, and then when he was returning to Tibet, the king and the army escorted him. And they said, And Mikhail Dorje said that after 7 years he would return to Zhang, but he was probably unable to return. But later, for the 10th Karmapa to spend a long time, Chun Dorje was able to spend a long time, and this is probably the reason. The fact that Mikhail Dorje had made the promise to return is the reason why the Karmapa Chun Dorje was able to spend a long time in Zhang, as it is said. And then, so the king of Zhang, as he said, he sent 500 monks per year, and he made offerings every year, and he did as he had promised. And there are lists of the offerings that he made every year in the histories. And in Gyaokang, he founded the Kangsang Monastery. And we speak about the Zhang Kanjur, the Zhang collected works of the Buddha. The place where the Zhang Kanjur were first kept was at this Kangsang Monastery. I don't know where the woodblocks were carved, but later, the Zhang Kanjur was kept at the Kangsang Monastery. But later, the armies of the Mongolian Gushi Khan destroyed the Kangsang Monastery. It was completely destroyed, and it's no longer there. So that is in brief, the connection between the king of Zhang and so forth. So tomorrow what I will speak about, the Gyeong Karmapa, I'll speak about the relations between the Ming emperors and the Gyeong Karmapas. And the reason to explain this is that it's not just that I merely want to speak about it. It's that Mikhail Dorje was invited by the Ming Emperor Zhengde. And so what was the reason why the Ming Emperor invited Mikhail Dorje? Well, with that, if we look at the reasons for that, then we probably have to speak about it from the time of the 5th Karmapa, Daishin Shekpa. From that point, that there's the relations between the Karmapas and the Ming dynasty began. And so from his time on until the time of the 9th Karmapa, there were relations between the Ming emperors and the kings. And so I think we have no choice but to talk about it from the time of the 5th Karmapa, Daishin Shekpa. So we have to discuss how did there develop a connection between the Karmapa and the Ming emperors, in particular, the connection with the Chinese people. So I think it's probably good for us to describe that. And then after that, the 8th Karmapa was invited by the 8th Karmapa was invited by the Ming emperors. And so whether he went or not, you will learn tomorrow. So I'll speak about that tomorrow. So that is enough for today.